Good day, I'm Vincent Saxtetter, and this is the After the Age of Fire channel. This is episode 38, recorded March 28th, 2026, and the title is Our Long-Term Energy Supply. This is a very important episode because it is the end of the first third of this channel's content, and it'll summarize the last 20 plus episodes about how much energy we'll have in the long term as a human race. Long term being 50 years or more. This is a prepping channel. It's for you and your family line to help you prepare to flourish and thrive and reproduce in the coming era. Right now we're ending an era of around 250 years of doubling our consumption of everything, energy, and just about any other resource, doubling every 22 years, so each generation had about twice as much as the previous generation. That's averaging worldwide. Of course, some had it much better than others. And we're coming into a new era where the doubling will not continue. We'll have to figure out how to be satisfied with our lives in a world where we're not having twice as much of everything all the time, and how to thrive. And in fact, our consumption will be a bit reduced. It'll be, right now we consume around 46,000 calories per person per day of fuel and renewables, about 41,000 from coal, oil, and gas, another 5,000 from renewables, and then the other 15,000 is from food, fodder, and wood. So the total today is around 60,000 calories per person per day. That's averaging worldwide, and we'll get down to something more like 30,000 sometime in the next 50 to 100 years. So that's what we're preparing for, is how to live in the new era with a little bit less energy consumption than we have now, one half. Still much more than our energy consumption 300 years ago. Still with all sorts of tech and other wonderful things that we didn't have 300 years ago, but with a little bit less energy, and without the multiplications, and how to flourish and thrive and reproduce in that new era. This channel has 3 sections, and this present episode culminates the first 38 episodes that started last August 2025. It concludes it and summarizes much of the material. This first third of the channel has been about the growth of our consumption of energy and resources since starting around 1775. It's been about our current consumption, how much we're consuming today of the different energy sources, and about our energy supply, how much of that can be continued, and what are our chances of increasing any of them, or will they decrease. And so now we finally have the final results, and I'll summarize. Then in the next episode, we'll start into the second section of the channel, which is about where we are now. Where are we, in fact, in that process of ending the era of multiplications, of exponential growth, and of entering the new era? Has that transition already begun? Or is it still in the future? Are we still multiplying? Or is it past? Are the multiplications done and we're already and then what will it look like? What will this transition look like? So that'll be the next 20 or 30 episodes, and then the third section will be after that. It'll be describing I can't tell you everything about the new era. I can only reason about certain things based on our energy consumption, our resources, and so on. But what can we know about that new era? And how do you prepare for it? Because there are some things you can be sure of, like we're not going to have as much energy as we have now. So that's where we will really get into the prepping advice, and it'll end after describing how to prepare for that future. Then I'll have some thoughts about what kind of story are we in. This has been an amazing era of just explosive prosperity and also tragedy the last 250 years, and now we're facing something which we would rather not face, which is that we are not able to make this continue, and we'll have to enter something else, a new way of life. And what's the meaning of this? What sort of story is this? Is this a tragedy? Is it a farce? Is it a comedy? What is it? Okay. What is the meaning? What sort of story are we in? So, in this episode, I'll conclude and put together all our long discussions about energy sources. And there will be things that will be repeated, but I think this is where it'll come into its full synthesis and you'll get the big picture. So with that said, let's get started. And first I'd like to ask, what is the essence of our growth? These last 250 years, what was the center of it? And the center is, in essence, that we're fire lovers. We love fire. And this is the age of fire. This is the age where these last 250 years are the age where we figured out how to burn things for all sorts of uses besides cooking and warming ourselves. So we began to burn things to fuel machines, and that began in 1712 with the Newcomen steam engine, that we figured out how to actually power an engine with fire. And 50 years later, or maybe a bit earlier, but just not long after the Newcomen steam engine was invented, our doublings began, our doublings of our energy consumption. We built machines, and those machines gave us ways to get more fuel, and gave us more things to do with fuel, and we just continued in a cycle of building more machines, needing more fuel, getting more fuel, and burning it, and almost all of it was coal, oil, and gas. Even today, 9/10 of our energy supply, if you're not counting the food, fodder, and wood, is from coal, oil, and gas, roughly around a third each, and only around a tenth is from the renewables, nuclear included. So it's really all been about burning things. It's always the same story, and it's been continuing just pretty much the same way for 250 years. We burn things, we consume things, we produce things, and we throw them away. That's the essence of it all. The center and foundation of this era of growth was a rich supply of burnable material that was essentially almost free. Now I need to say something, because you may have noticed that gasoline isn't exactly free, okay? So when I say it's essentially almost free, I should say exactly what I mean by that. I mean that gas, coal, and oil are free in the sense that in comparison to what you get, you work very little, you invest very little, you risk very little, you endure small consequences and small side effects. You can use an awful lot of them without killing yourself. Now, that it may seem a little bit hard to pay for a full tank of gas, or for the fuel that powers your jet plane, or that heats your house, okay? But most of us pay a tenth or less of our income for energy, and that's not the way it was until 250 years ago. Until 250 years ago, most of the human race's effort was devoted to getting energy in one form or another. It was getting energy in the form of food, or energy to feed your horses, or lumber to build things out of, or to heat your house. And even 150 years ago, working class people in the U.S. were spending a large fraction, half of their family budget, on food, which is an energy source. So I compared to that, where we are right now is we pay much less of our, we just we don't devote that much effort individually or wealth to getting the energy that keeps us going. So, and we don't suffer that much in consequence of using that energy. We do have something going on with carbon dioxide and different kinds of smoke in the air, and lung disease, but compared to the way things were when you use some energy, the consequences just aren't. I mean, we're able to get away with using an awful lot more. If we burned wood, burned forests on the scale that if it was just burning wood instead of burning all the coal, oil, and gas, you wouldn't be able to see the light of day anywhere on this planet. So we're in some sense getting a lot of energy for almost nothing. And what's happening right now is we're coming to the end of that it'll no longer be a something for almost nothing deal. Coal, oil, and gas won't be in any sense almost free anymore. They'll require a lot more sacrifice and effort. So I made an episode about the end of oil and another one about the end of coal, oil, and gas, and I keep mentioning the end of these things. It's not really an end, it's just that at some point they'll no longer be almost free. So they're at a heavy discount, and because they're at a heavy discount, they've enabled our modern economies to spend just a small fraction of everything on them. Okay, and that's just not going to continue. There is one thing that I think is a bit hidden, but it's hidden in plain sight, is that we have such a glut of resources and of products that it's rapidly, turning us into this consumerism and the consequences of living in with huge amounts of food available, and every other luxury is rapidly disintegrating our society and our own individual personalities. So there are some consequences to living with a glut, okay, but they aren't the ones that directly kill you, like the same amount of wood smoke would if you burnt 46,000 calories of wood smoke every day per person. So in the future, in the new era, energy, whatever its form, will require substantial sacrifice and work, and will have consequences. So we'll have to make trade-offs between the different forms of the different ways we can get energy. So we discussed at length our ability to get more energy from food, fodder, and wood. First of all, there's the problem that the way we get energy from our cropland, the way that we get our crops, is actually causing our cropland to be destroyed or degraded. And so if we just try to stay with the status quo way of farming, we won't be able to continue getting that 15,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood. We'll have to sacrifice somewhere. So if we want to continue to get the 15,000 calories, then we'll have to give our farms and our pastures a lot more attention and scrutiny and individual effort. We'll have to work harder for it. There will be more people on the land. I've discussed this at length in some previous episodes. You can go back and look at those. And then if we want, after a lot of consideration, I suggested that it's possible that in the next century or two, if most of us go back to the land to work there and to get the best out of, and to work on smaller scale farms, to give them very personal, long-term, lifetime attention, then it may be possible, and also use all of our tech and so on, but less of the big machines, still using small machines, but less of the huge combines and things, because our farms will be smaller. In that case, we could possibly increase our harvest of food, fodder, and wood by a factor of 2, increase it to 30,000. Okay, so we could continue and perhaps double our supply of calories from food, fodder, and wood, but there would be a substantial sacrifice for it, substantial effort. Okay, so another way of getting energy is, of course, coal, oil, and gas, and we're coming to the point where it'll no longer be so easy to get, and it'll first, and then we'll have some options, and one will be to just do with less, in which case our supply will roughly over 25 years it'll divide by 2, and then over another 25 years it'll divide by 2 again, so we'll have around a quarter of the supply. It'll go down from the present 41,000 calories per person per day to something more like 10,000 calories. Or the other option is that we send armies underground for coal, the way that coal used to be mined, with pickaxes, or individual people, maybe using small machines, person-sized machines, not in small, thin coal seams, only 50 centimeters thick or something like that, and then to get gas, we'll invest more in getting gas, because oil will run out before gas will. There's still a lot of gas around, but gas is a lot harder to deal with. You need a lot of infrastructure, pipelines, and storage areas, and things to cool down the gas, turn it into LNG, move it around, and there's a lot of risk. If you a gas pipeline is really easy to destroy, and we'll have to do with lower grades of coal. So we'll have to go back to experiencing acid rain and stuff like that. So again, we could, and that would give us a bit more. That will allow us to maintain a level of energy consumption that from coal, oil, and gas that would be higher than 10,000, at least for a while. I'm not sure how long that would continue. It would be less than the present 41,000, but we could certainly slow down the decrease by making these choices. Again, we can do something about our supply of energy from these sources, but we'd have to sacrifice. Then the third option is wind and solar and hydro. Okay, and I went into some depth several times about the costs and the pros and cons and the difficulties of using these energy sources, and the basic to boil it down, these energy sources will never be cheap. So if we use them strictly as and also there's a big difference between using these sources as supplements to something else and using them as our chief energy source. If we use wind and solar and hydro as our chief energy source, in other words, if all our energy comes to us via electricity, then there will be huge consequences, horrifying consequences that will take effect very quickly. Because there are many reasons, and I discussed them in a recent episode. But one of them is that if your society depends entirely on electricity, then whoever is supplying the energy has complete control over your society. It's worse than having a city with a walled city with invaders at the gates, because these invaders can come anytime they like, without and do whatever destruction that they like anytime. So that's one reason, but there are many reasons why that's if you depend on wind, solar, and hydro almost exclusively. If instead you use them as a supplement, then life is not. They're more livable. Okay, but then you but then you still have to deal with the fact that they cost something. It takes a lot of effort to make a wind turbine and the batteries that you need, and to wire your world so that the whole world is, I mean, large portions of the land are covered by wind turbines. If you were to supply all of your electricity from wind turbines, essentially the whole world except for near the equator would be covered with wind turbines. So there are many problems, and there's a cost, and the cost is so expensive that we'll never be. We just don't have enough money on hand, and we never will, to build more than about 15,000 calories of wind turbines and solar and hydro per person per day. So they can't. So there's a cost, and the cost is you just have to decide how much of your money and your resources you want to spend on solar and wind turbines. And then there was one more option, which is nuclear. And at present, nuclear is more costly than wind and solar. Perhaps the cost could come down to wind and solar, but the price would be that right now our safety standards for nuclear are far higher than our safety standards for any other technology or machine. We require just incredibly high safety standards, and we'd have to let those decrease until we'd have to accept substantially lower safety standards from nuclear, and then perhaps the price of nuclear could come down to match something like wind, solar, and hydro. Until then, it's not really an option. So what I just covered all the possible ways that we could get energy. All of them will require effort, lots of money, and lots of sacrifice. And that's what I mean about energy not being free, or almost free, not even being almost free in the coming era. Until now, we were able to consume as much coal, oil, and gas as we like, with little worry about it, until just the last decade or two, when we began to worry about carbon dioxide, and some people more worried about that than others. But with these, but other than that conceptual worry, there's really been no immediate consequences for a person who fills up their gas tank. Whereas in the coming era, if you want more coal, oil, and gas, you'll have to really pay for it, because there will be lots of people working for it underground, or lots of machinery to handle the natural gas. If you want more energy grown on the land, then you'll have to pay for it, because it'll require a lot of work from a lot of people on the land to produce your energy. If you want more energy from wind or solar or nuclear, you'll have to pay for it, because they just take so much effort. So all energy will require human work and sacrifice, and we'll have to decide where to spend ourselves, where to spend our resources and our effort. So I just want to discuss, to illustrate the point, I wanted to discuss a few options that we could take. One is we could throw all our effort into our farms, okay, and perhaps reach 30,000 calories per person per day. Or we could throw all our resources and our money and effort into building more renewables, and maybe we could get another 15,000 from our renewables, or total of 15,000 calories per person per day from our renewables, which added to our food, fodder, and wood would give us a total of 30,000. Or maybe we could send our armies underground and build all the gas infrastructure everywhere, and try to keep our energy supply from coal, oil, and gas above 10,000 calories a while longer. So try to delay the try to extend the peak. We'll come to a peak sometime soon in our energy supply, and try to extend that, and to try to delay the year or the decade when those begin to collectively decrease. Anyway, or we could do a combination of all three. We could put some more effort and send more people back to the land to farm. We could, and at the same time, spend some extra money on renewables, and at the same time spend some extra energy and time and money and people on the mines and on the energy production from our coal, oil, and gas. Anyway, we'll have to make trade-offs all around. We can't do them all, or we'll have to do them all partially. Okay, so partial commitments to those options will give partial results. So because if we throw ourselves completely into one of the options, then maybe we can continue 30,000 calories basing on our energy supply from one chief energy source, either renewables or coal, oil, and gas, or our food, fodder, and farms. Or more likely we'll do a combination, and since any of those options, since if we throw ourselves into one exclusively, that gives us around 30,000 for any of those three options, then well, except for maybe eventually our even if we throw ourselves completely into the mines and into the natural gas, eventually, centuries from now, that will start to decrease. But anyway, I'm saying that throwing ourselves into one may allow us to maintain 30,000. Throwing ourselves less wholeheartedly but partially into each of the three will probably also give us around 30,000, just split between the three sources. So the final point is the point is that we can't maintain the 60,000 that we use now. It's going to decrease, and it'll decrease to somewhere around 30,000. And it'll be some combination of coal, oil, and gas, crops, and lumber, and then renewables. And I suspect that it will be in order that they'll be prioritized according to the strength of the impacts, or what I call poisonousness of the three options. In a previous episode, I said that every way of getting energy has an impact on our lives, requires sacrifices, and makes changes to our lives in ways that are generally bigger than one would expect. And I call that a poison. When something has an impact on you that's bigger than it should, that's what I call it being a poison. You can go back a few episodes and you'll find my discussion of that topic. And the ones that have the least impact, where the impact is compared to the amount of energy you get is the smallest, are the ones that are closest to the way that we originally got our energy when we were hunter-gatherers. So the least impact, or the least poisonous way of getting energy is food, fodder, and wood. That's the most closely related to the way we were built, and the way that we fit into this biosphere, and the way the biosphere is built. And then the next larger impact is from coal, oil, and gas, which have the benefit that they did originally come from the biosphere. Even though they've been transformed underground, they're still carbon-based, and they still contain energy, an amount of energy similar to the amount in say, dry grain or wood, and dry wood. And they're also are relatively not that poisonous because they're carbon-based. And then the most poisonous, the one with the greatest impact on our lives, if we build enough, renewables and nuclear. And you may not think that these, particularly when you think of wind and solar and their impacts on your life, well, you should just bear in mind that right now we're getting something like 500 or 700 calories per person per day from each of those, which is nothing. What I'm saying is you would really start to notice their impact on your life if we were harvesting 10 or 20 or 30 times as much wind or solar or nuclear. And then you would realize that these are far harder to live with, say a whole world covered in a forest of wind turbines and all the consequences, and the wind turbines and the rubbish afterwards and all the access roads and everything. That would be far harder to live with than a world covered with farmland and pasture land. And in fact, already about a third of our world is covered with farmland and pasture land. And you just have to, and we're getting away with it, so to speak. So I expect, based on the scale of poisonousness of impacts, that the final combination that we adopt will tend to favor getting more energy from the land, from food, fodder, and wood. And then next up will be, as a supplement, will be coal, oil, and gas. So we'll be getting less from coal, oil, and gas than, you know, you can think, would most people rather spend their life underground, or would they rather spend their life roaming around on the Earth's surface? And it's clear enough which one. And then we'll also have a supplement of renewables and nuclear, but again, it'll be even less than coal, oil, and gas, and it'll be a supplement. So overall, the energy that we'll obtain will be proportional to the work and sacrifice that we give to it. If we work more, we'll get more energy. If we work less, we'll get less energy. So one conclusion is there will be no unemployment problem in the coming era. Unemployment is a symptom of there being almost free energy. It means that there's plenty of energy to go around, therefore there's plenty of food to go around, and so people are able to sit on their hands, and it has no real bearing on whether society goes forward or not. But when energy is harder to get, and when you have to work for it, then individual people's labor will always be useful, because any person who chooses to labor will in one way or another contribute to the energy supply of the whole society. There will still be some leisure. Okay, I'm not saying that we'll be back to days where everybody works 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, as I imagine things may have been. I'm not sure. They may have been that way 500 years ago for most people. Anyway, it's not necessarily that I don't think we're going to go back to that quite, because we will have far more energy on hand than the people did back then. We will still have something like 30,000 calories per person per day, split between some combination of food, fodder, and wood, and coal, oil, and gas, and renewables, which is far more than an average person worldwide would have had 500 years ago. Far more than that. So if you have far more, that means your life does not directly depend on whether you work, or your children's lives don't directly depend on whether you work whether you work 16 hours instead of 14 hours, or whether you work perhaps for many people you could still get away with 8 or 10 hours a day. I don't know, but certainly you'll have some extra hours on hand because you aren't in imminent danger of starving to death if you don't work those extra hours. So I think we'll have enough insulation. with that extra energy supply, a much larger, several times the energy supply that we had 300 years ago, we'll have that extra insulation, so we uh, still have some free time on our hands, and we'll still be able to keep eating reliably if we choose to organize ourselves that way. Which brings us to the question of food versus energy. What about that? Because food embodies energy, and some of the 30,000 calories that we'll have per person per day will be food, fodder, and wood, and some of it will be for energy, and we'll have to figure out how to split that up. So at present, our 15,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood, around 2,700 get eaten we eat it, and many of us are overweight now, so perhaps we could do with a little less. Another 1,500 or so are wasted. Just we throw them out somewhere between the farm and our mouths. There's another 7,500 that's fodder for our animals that produce luxury. I don't know. Out of that 7,500 fodder, we get less than 1,000 calories of milk and eggs and meat, which I'm very glad to be able to eat those things, but we lose a lot of calories by feeding those animals. And then another 710 calories are going to biofuel for cars and for electrical generating plants. That's how it goes right now. So that means if we were to go vegetarian, if the whole world went full vegetarian, no milk, no eggs, no meat, and if we stopped wasting food, we could free up another 9,000 calories. I'm not suggesting that we should do that, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to have less food, less meat on average than we do now. Because whenever the price of meat will be higher, it'll be priced in a way that respects the fact that either we consume the meat or we have a certain amount of energy for our cars or whatever. So we could do with less. Anyway, we'll have to make some choice, and and everybody will have different choices about how much of their effort they want to spend on getting meat and other food, and how much effort they want to spend on getting other things that require energy. There will always be a direct competition between our food supply and our energy use. In fact, that's the way it always was until 250 years ago. People had a choice about whether to spend their effort and their resources on getting food for themselves and their families, or on something else. And countries had to decide that. They had to decide whether to feed, rulers had to decide whether to feed their people or go to war. Or anything else they wanted. And they took their lumps. You starve your people, you may die at the guillotine after 20 years. You make your choices, and you get your consequences. And that's the way it will be again, okay? At present, we live in a glut of energy and a glut of food. So people were able to do and societies were able to do pretty much what they wanted, okay? And somehow we got to the point of thinking that energy is different than food. They're not. And so everyone in every society, every government will be involved in negotiations about food versus energy. Nothing different than the way things have been throughout all of human history except for the last 250 years. I'm not saying that in the the coming era will be a wonderful thing if some social arrangement or some ruler or whatever decides to let people starve in order to get something else. I hope, in fact, I hope, as I said, that will happen less than before, because we will still have far more calories per person than we did then. At present we have, let's see, we have out of the 15,000 food, fodder, and wood that we have now, all of that except for 2,000, so about 12,600 are crops and fodder, and that means we have enough to feed everyone 6 times over. We just happen to not do that. We happen to waste some of it and feed most of it to our cows and our chickens and so on. So in a world like that, like the one we have now, there's really no excuse for there being any famine at all. It's our fault whenever anybody's malnourished or dies. And we'll still continue to have plentiful supplies of food. I mean, supplies like this of food, fodder, and wood, 15,000 calories or more, and so we'll still continue to have, unless somebody works out a way for some period of time to just take all the food, fodder, and wood away from some group of people and use them for something else. People will continue to stay alive. So I don't think it'll be a worse world than it was 300 years ago. It'll be better in terms of supply. But there will always be a trade-off between our food supply and our energy supply. So that brings me, the next thing I want to discuss is how the energy might be distributed among us, among the human race. And I'll discuss 3 scenarios. This is the sort of thing I can't make any predictions about, because I just don't know what choices people will make, or how people will organize themselves, what governments different countries will have. I don't know what countries there will be 100 years from now. I suspect that many of the countries' borders and many of the countries' names will be substantially different 100 years from now, but no way of saying where things are going. I do have I will, in later content in this channel, I will talk about some politics and some geopolitics. I think that the energy supply and resource supply determines a lot of politics and geopolitics, but I can't tell you which political party will win, or the outlines of your favorite country 100 years from now. But here's 3 scenarios for how we could distribute our energy. Okay. Well, first of all, how much? Let's just for simplicity, let's discuss one simple scenario for how our energy sources will be. So suppose that a scenario where we maintain 15,000 calories of food, fodder, and wood, and we have another 15,000 calories from a combination of renewables and coal, oil, and gas. So in this scenario, basically already the coal, oil, and gas have divided by 4. We haven't sent the armies underground. We haven't built the huge amount of pipes and infrastructure necessary to continue harvesting natural gas. We've just let coal, oil, and gas drop, and so they've divided by 4. They're at 10,000, and we are, and then we get another 5,000 from the renewables and nuclear. Okay, which is where we are now with those, and but it'll require a lot more of effort, because to make renewables and nuclear you need energy to build the machinery and operate everything. There will be less energy on hand. It'll be more expensive, and so it'll be hard to continue even the 5,000 calories of renewables and nuclear that we have now. Okay, so more work, more resources, more sacrifice for those, And then we maintain our food, fodder, and wood at 15,000 calories, same as it is now. But that also will get increasingly difficult because the way that we practice our farming right now degrades the land, and also because we rely a lot on coal, oil, and gas for farming, for our machinery, and for our fertilizer, and for everything else we do with the farms. And so our farms will require more work and more resources just to maintain the 15,000. We'll have to send more people onto the farms. They'll have to work harder to maintain 15,000 long term. So this is a world where we've maintained food, fodder, and wood, but at the cost of extra sacrifice and extra work. We've maintained renewables and nuclear, but at the expense of extra sacrifices and extra work. And we've let coal, oil, and gas divide by 4, and that comes out to around 30,000 calories total per person per day for the whole human race. So with that picture in mind, so I just sketching that, just you could rearrange the numbers any way you like, but I think in general it'll be somewhere around 30,000, as I already argued a few minutes ago. So scenario 1 is one where we take that 30,000 calories per person per day and we distribute it equally across the whole world. And what would that look like? Okay, for one half of the world, a little more than 4 billion people, it would leave them where they are already. Actually, the 15,000 calories of fuel and renewables is what they have now, and they actually have less than 15,000 calories of the food, fodder, and wood, because the lion's share of that goes to the rich countries. Okay, so so they would be a little better off. They would have the same energy supply, and they would have more food. Okay, so for them, it's really no skin off their backs, except for that they wouldn't be seeing the doublings that I'm sure they're hoping for in their wealth and their energy supply. So which countries are these? This is Africa and all of Asia except for 4 Asian countries: Australia, South Korea, China, and Japan. So that adds up to around 1.4 billion in Africa and around 3 billion in that portion of Asia, leaving out those particular rich countries: Australia, South Korea, China, and Japan. There's still Asia's huge, and between Asia and Africa, it's more than half the world's population, and on average they're using 15,000 calories, and that's where things would stand, so nothing changes for them. Okay, but for the rich half of the world, that's around 3.5 billion people. Right now, the rich half of the world consumes on average 94,000 calories per person per day. Okay, so if we brought them into parity with the whole world, so they were just using the world average of 15,000 calories, then that would divide their energy supply from 94,000 to 15,000. The rich half of the world's energy supply would divide by 6. And it would be even worse for some countries. For instance, the 330 million people in the United States would see their energy supply divide by 14, going from 210,000 to 15,000. So we'd have the rich half of the world, to them it would seem like they would have no energy anymore, even though actually they'd be living with the same amount as everyone else in the world. Okay, of course this is just a thought experiment, okay, because this scenario would just generate utter mayhem. Okay, the rich countries of the world will not consent to any such decrease in energy. Even a 10% would be a decrease in energy is something that they will fight against. And a division by 6 or by 14, they will not consent to this without extremely strong motivation. They'll see it as an act of war, as destruction of a race, of a culture, of genocide. They'll see it as a robbery, and they will fight it tooth and nail. So that's the equal distribution scenario for our energy. So overall, what I'm saying is you divide the human race's energy supply by 2, okay, and then if you do that and you leave the poor half of the world consuming the same amount that they're consuming now, then the rich half of the world has their energy supply divided by 6, okay, and then they'll be kicking and screaming, and not just that, they'll be raising all sorts of hell, literally, because they're losing that energy that they think is theirs. Okay. So scenario 2, okay, is one where one particular rich country maintains its consumption as is, and the whole rest of the world equalizes. So the rich country that I'm thinking of here, just as a thought experiment, is that the United States maintains its energy consumption at 210,000 calories per person per day. Okay. That's 330 million people maintaining their energy consumption. And already, of course, they would be extremely unhappy because they wouldn't be experiencing economic growth, which everyone feels that they need. But then the rest of the world, in order to compensate for that, would have the other 8 billion people would have 7,100 calories per person. So that's if the world if the average energy supply worldwide were 30,000 calories. So the way you could do that is you could give the US 210,000 calories per person and the rest of the world 7,000. So then you'd have to ask, how could the United States motivate the rest of the world to do with a very small fraction of its present energy supply? They'd have to tell all the other rich countries to divide their energy supply by more than 10. And they'd have to tell all the poor countries to divide their energy supply by 2. 8 billion people the US would have to shove around to do that. How could it ever do that? Well, I'm sure that a lot of people would be thinking about how to get that done. But whether they could or not is a different matter, but I'm sure they'd give it the old college try. If you had a slightly higher energy supply worldwide, so if the average worldwide were 37,500 instead of 30,000, so 25% higher, still not the 60,000 that we have now, okay, then you could have a scenario where the United States maintains its energy supply at 210,000 and the rest of the world is at 15,000. So that would mean the United States maintains its energy supply, the poor half of the world stays exactly where it is, and the rich half of the world, other than the United States, sees its energy supply divide by 6. Okay. Now, for comparison, let's think about Africa, the major part of Africa. If you leave out South Africa and the southern tip, and you leave out Algeria, Egypt, and Morocco, which are oil-rich, on the northern coast of Africa, that still leaves around 1.2 billion people, and those 1.2 billion people have 4,300 calories per person per day today. So, so this scenario where you have the United States maintaining its consumption would be pushing the rest of the world down to levels a little bit above the average level in most of Africa. So, in any case, I don't think this is a realistic scenario either. I think that the United States will try its best to maintain its energy supply at all costs, but I don't think it will in the end win this battle. But one thing's for sure is that from these two scenarios so far, you can be sure that there will be intense energy competition between all countries and all people, okay? And there will be intense pressure to get more energy, okay, because you get some more energy, and it changes the equation a lot. It changes who can stay rich and who can who's reduced down to African levels, and anything in between. Um, uh, and you can, because of that intense competition and pressure, there'll be no shortage of work at all, as I've mentioned before. Okay, no shortage of competition, even conflict, and no shortage of work. The third scenario is that there's no dominant country. Okay, and instead there are certain wealthy cities, wealthy classes, and wealthy people that use more than their share of energy, maybe even more than the U.S. levels right now, maybe 1,000,000 calories per person per day in some particular neighborhood or whatever. Okay, and which is true today. We also today have individuals who spend far more than their share of energy. So this seems by far the most likely scenario. Some pockets of wealth and some households of wealth, and others that are farther down the scale, and in a world where there will be that's very fluid, where there's constant negotiation, constant power struggles. In other words, the usual world. So it's the way things have always been. So I think that I just wanted to lay out the options here. So maybe you would still have 330 million people consuming an average of 210,000, but those 330 million would be spread across the whole world alongside another 8 billion people who would be consuming far less, or anywhere in between. So I think that's the way it'll go. So I can't make any predictions about how the decrease will go, okay? And I laid out these three scenarios, talking about roughly what the options will be like, okay? But one thing is for sure, that the rich people won't be able to divert all the energy to themselves, okay? It's very simple. In order to get energy in this new era, in this new world, you have to work. You need people to work to get it. Either they'll work in the fields, in the forests, or they'll work in the coal mines and on the gas fields, or they'll work on the renewables. But they'll work. And most of them will be in the fields, in the forests, in the pastures. And if you want to get any energy at all, you need those workers, and and therefore the rich, if they want to have plenty of energy, they need to have plenty of workers around, and because they need the workers to get their energy. It's a lot different than today's world. You need very few workers for your oil wells, okay? Because they need those workers, the power will be in the workers' hands ultimately. The workers won't be very well organized, probably most of the time, okay? But in the end, the rich will not be able to starve them to death. They will not be able to take away all their food, their clothing, and their houses, because in that case, the rich won't get their energy. So I don't think the new world will be a world of assured slavery or assured starvation. Okay, I think any rich person or rich group who wants to continue to live in the same lifestyle will have to negotiate continuously with all the people that are helping them along, and will have to give something back, and have to ensure their security, have to ensure their food supply. And if they don't, there will be consequences. Also, I want to mention that I mentioned a couple times that mayhem could come in this reorganization, when we divide our energy supply by 2, okay? But it doesn't have to happen, okay? The world energy consumption in 1970, 55 years ago, was about the same as what we're going to be at long term. So redistributing our wealth in some way that most people are doing with a bit less, but still it's not out of living memory yet. And certainly 55 years ago, we were able to live that way without necessarily killing each other all the time. So it may be a bit disappointing to find ourselves as a race, and most of us individually, doing with less, but it doesn't mean that we have to go and kill the whole human race off or something like that. Okay, so it's not guaranteed that it's up to us whether we decide to go through this transition incredibly violently or not. Lastly, in this episode, I want to discuss, are we responsible for the last 250 years of our growth, and can we force it to continue? And if we can't force it, if we don't force it to continue, does that mean we're guilty? Maybe I'm guilty. We can blame ourselves, or we can blame some other, the rich people or the poor people or another country or a particular religion or a particular class or a particular race. Is it that somebody is not doing their part or deliberately trying to take advantage of me, or is that why somebody's guilty and that's why the energy supply is not continuing as it was, and our growth is not continuing as it was? So when I ask, are we responsible for what we've done, and can we make it continue, there's always this set of related questions about guilt. Your own guilt, or the guilt of somebody else who's at fault. Okay. So my answer is no, and no, we aren't responsible for the last 250 years of growth, and we have no power to make it continue. And I'll give several reasons. One reason is, of course, we had help. We had a lot of help. We were in a fortuitous circumstance. We had lots of burnable material on hand, so we were just able to burn as fast as we could. Okay. So the human race was in a situation similar to that of, say, a bacterium that's wandering across some difficult environment, across, on people's shoes, crawling across desktops, and one day ends up suddenly in a petri dish or in somebody's open wound, and suddenly is able to go crazy and take over the petri dish or kill the person, just multiply by like crazy. But most of the time of its lifespan and its progenitor's lifespan, it was just wandering through a very difficult environment, and just happens to luck out one day and suddenly it multiplies. That's what the human race has been like. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the time scale of our history. Okay, this period of growth, of doubling every 22 years, started around 250 years ago, but the human race has been around a lot longer than that. Okay, and you can debate exactly when the human race started. I think to me, I don't think it's possible to say very clearly. Okay, but we can talk about some of the landmarks in our history. Okay, it's certainly true that somebody like us, with two legs and walking erect and two arms, opposable thumbs, was making stone tools and using them 3 million years ago. 3.3. That's 10,000 times earlier than when our growth started. Okay. We started cooking our own food when we had the opportunity. It's unclear to me whether whether we were starting fires or simply using them when they did start. Okay, but already almost 1,000,000 years ago, 780,000 years ago, humans were cooking their own food, or somebody like us was cooking our own food, cooking their own food. The first burials, the first human burials of humans or somebody like us was 250,000 years ago. That's 1,000 times longer ago than our multiplication started. Okay. We started wearing clothing at least 170,000 years ago. We have clothing from that date. And then we were living with some excursions in Africa, but already going outside of Africa from time to time, but we began to seriously take over the rest of the world sometime around 80,000 years ago. So that's, compared to 250 years of multiplications, that's 30 times more. Okay. And we began to build our first cities 10,000 years ago. Of course, at that time, those cities were more like towns. Today, they had 1,000 to 10,000 people. Okay. But we began to build these towns that we call cities 10,000 years ago, still 40 times longer ago than our multiplication started. We started writing around 5,500 years ago. So in any case, any of these hallmarks, if you draw the line anywhere, and for when the human race started, we have spent almost the entire history of the human race not multiplying by 2 every 22 years, or anything like it. Okay? What changed 250 years ago wasn't us. It was our circumstances. We stumbled into understanding how to get energy from underground. We were hunter-gatherers, and we became aware of an opportunity, and we took it. That's what hunter-gatherers do. They roam, and they find things, and they use them. That's what we did 250 years ago until now. It was our circumstances. It wasn't us. We had something to do with it, okay? But we were in a very special situation. Okay? So if that situation isn't there anymore, if the rich supplies of almost free oil and coal and gas aren't there anymore, it's not our fault if we don't continue to multiply by 2. It never was entirely our fault or our responsibility. Okay? Another reason why it's not our fault, it's not our responsibility, is that exponential growth, every exponential growth, no matter where you find it, no matter what's doing it, is always a sign of a loss of control. It's a failure to self-regulate. Okay? It's something being in a perfect environment and taking it for all it's worth. That's what exponential growth is. It's a perfect storm, and something is taking advantage of it. That's what exponential growth is. So it's true for cancers, and for nuclear explosions, for epidemics, for bacteria in a petri dish. Okay, wherever it happens, it's that there was an opportunity, and there was no need and no use of self-regulation. So just whatever it was grew as fast as it could. So if anything, these last centuries have been ones where we threw all our self-control to the winds, individually and collectively. Whatever you want, you deserve. So this has not been, certainly there were people who worked hard, there were people who were very inventive, there were nations that were heroic these last 250 years, okay? But in the end, what this has come down to is whoever was the fastest to exploit the new opportunity, the next opportunity, whoever was fastest to burn more energy, they got ahead. Okay, and it's been just, uh, and strong motivation. Just you put an endless feast in front of people, and you watch themselves gorge themselves. You watch them gorge themselves. It's predictable. Okay, there's no, you take, you may know some people who, there may be some people who act with some restraint, but the people who don't act with restraint, they win. And that's the way it's been. So I think certainly there have been good things, heroic things, and so on, but in the end, as a race, this is not about self-control. This is about exploiting an opportunity as fast as you can. About being at the dinner table and throwing as much food down your throat as quickly as you can, and repeating and repeating and repeating. So then there's another answer. There's no, we're not responsible for continuing exponential growth because it always ends when the perfect environment is no longer there. Once the nuclear bomb has blown itself apart, its explosion, its exponential growth ends. Okay? Once the bacteria have consumed all the food in the petri dish, they stop multiplying. When an epidemic has infected an entire country, it stops multiplying. Okay? And it's the same for us. Once we have consumed all the easily obtainable oil and we're on to the less easily obtainable coal, oil, and gas, then we're done. Another answer is if we did somehow continue our multiplication, okay, then we would just ruin ourselves. We would pave the world, and we would, we would end up eating stuff grown in vats because there wouldn't be soil to grow things on anymore. And we're at the point where we've replaced every land animal with ourselves and our cattle. A third of the world's land is covered by our pastures and farms. You try to multiply by 2, again and again after this. You try to multiply by 10 or 100 or 1,000, you just commit suicide. And lastly, I want to talk about best practices. An argument about that. We think we have all these ideas about how to develop optimally in the best possible way. Okay, like capitalism, or our system of education, or our system of medicine, or certain, or if you don't like capitalism, then socialism, or communism, or free speech, or democracy, or globalization, or you name any of several hundred or 1,000 different concepts and practices that we think are key to the functioning of our current society, key to our continued growth. Okay, those are our best practices. Okay, and we think that we now have the way that we often explain our multiplication over the last 250 years is that at some point we developed. We started with the scientific revolution, perhaps, and then we developed more and more of these best practices, and literacy, and it's this kind of technology of social engineering and human engineering that guarantees our forward momentum. Okay. And I think this is based on a fallacy, 2 fallacies. Okay, one is we've seen these best practices develop over the last hundreds of years, and simultaneously we've had growth going on for 250 years, multiplications. Okay, and they occurred at the same time. So people take that as indication that because we had best practices, we were growing. Okay, but all we know is that they happened at the same time. So it could equally well be that because we were growing, we developed our best practices. For instance, Britain, the United Kingdom, did not begin to abandon slavery until well after its doublings had begun. Okay, so it has a best practice. It abandoned slavery, and in fact, it went a long way to forcing the rest of the world to abandon slavery. Okay, that best practice started after its multiplication started. So it could be that because its multiplications were in place and were going along well, then it found it could do without slavery. Okay, so it could be that our best practices are consequences, not the source of our multiplications. And it also could be that neither one is the cause of neither is true, that the best practices aren't the reason why we grew, and that our growth is not the reason for our best practices. Okay, and that maybe something else caused both, or maybe they're a coincidence in some sense. I don't know, but all I'm saying is that you can't be sure that our best practices are the reason why we're growing. In some cases, perhaps, but then we come to the second fallacy. Okay, is that even if our best practices did help our growth over the last 250 years, that's no guarantee that they'll continue to do that for us in a new world, in different circumstances, in this new era. Okay, you have bacteria that are perfectly organized to multiply themselves every hour in a petri dish. Okay, they've adjusted their individual chemistry and their ways of interacting with each other, so they're getting the best multiplication that they can from their petri dish. Okay, and then their petri dish gets all eaten up. Okay, and there's no guarantee that their organization and their metabolism is going to see them through more multiplications. In fact, it won't. And in fact, it could be that if they continue on track as they were, they'll just die off more quickly than they could. So, no, these are all arguments. No, we're not responsible for the last 250 years of growth, and we can't force it to continue, no matter how hard we try, how inventive we are, how much we all get on board with some selection of best practices. We can't force this to continue. Okay, any person or any political party or any group who claims to have a recipe for growth continuing year on year is selling you either a lie or else they're deluded. So I personally, I would, if somebody tells you, or if some politician, some world leader tells you that they have a way to make their own country continue growing year on year indefinitely, or maybe for the world to grow year on year, or some political commentator, or some church, or whatever, either that person is deceptive and using, and somebody should absolutely stay away from, or else they're just deluded. Okay. Anyway, you should just take it as a witness that their judgment is not 100% perfect. They have a really blind spot. Sooner or later, in a world where the whole world's energy consumption is limited and will meet its limit soon, any particular group, any particular nation will also meet its limit sooner or later. It is perhaps possible to grow at the expense of everybody else for a while, but that while may be rather short, and there's no guarantee that you'll be able to continue it at all. So people who continue to talk about what to do to promote year-on-year growth of the economy or of wealth are not to be entirely trusted. You can leave that part out and think about what else they're saying that may be sensible or may not, okay? But their judgment is not right, and they may, and for many of them, they're bad actors. Okay. So let me summarize this episode. And in fact, in a way, I'm summarizing the entire first 38 episodes. It's not true that we did this, that we and only we are responsible for these extraordinary 250 years. Okay, we had a special opportunity. We should not insist that we must continue. Okay, if we don't continue the multiplications, it doesn't mean that we're guilty, either me or somebody else. It doesn't imply anything about guilt. It's just something that we can't control. Okay, we can't make it continue. We can't force the multiplications to continue. Okay, and if another era of exponential growth comes, another era of doublings, maybe doublings onto other stars and other galaxies, who knows, then that era and its timing will not be under our control. We can't make it happen now. It'll come in its own time, if it ever comes at all. So, I'm not saying that we might explore stars in the meantime, but we're in no way able to continue the current doublings every 22 years. There just aren't. We don't have the tech. We don't have the machinery. We can't we can't go to a star, move half of us to a star 22 years from now, and then to another 2 stars after another 22 years. We're just not there. So, what do I think? I think it's time to accept that we received something. I'm not talking about who gave it or something. I'm just saying that this is something that wasn't ours. Okay, and we came into a jackpot. We found a pot of gold at the end of a rainbow. We didn't earn this growth. Somehow we got something for nothing. Okay. We live apparently in an unequal, unjust universe. Okay. And in this particular universe, we got far better than we deserve. We didn't earn all this coal, oil, and gas, all this wealth, all this multiplication. We just got it. We came across it. We did have some work and some sacrifice along the way, but in the end, it wasn't all because of us. It was because we were in an unequal world. We saw an opportunity and we took it. So we should not insist that others follow our rules that we think obtained our success. So it's common for say capitalists to insist that the whole world should be capitalist, or for socialists to insist the whole world should be socialist. Why? Because this is the way to guarantee a good life. Okay, we think we've come across, we've hit on the right way to organize ourselves, the right set of best practices, and since this is the way to thrive, we insist that everyone else should do it. But we don't. These best practices were not the whole reason why we've done as well as we have. And it's, the rich countries can't say the poor countries are poor because they didn't do the things we did. Okay. That may have, a lot of it was just circumstance. It was that the rich countries came into the right circumstance and took it. Okay, and that circumstance is going away. Maybe 200 years ago, the poor countries had a chance. If they had moved quickly, they would have gotten rich too. Okay, but by now it's too late. The way, if they ever do come into wealth, it'll be in a different way, because wealth will be harder to get. You'll have to work for it. Another thing is in fact, I think we always, as a human race, we always get better than we deserve, and we should act the same way to others. There's always things on our plate, and there always have been, that there were opportunities. As hunter-gatherers, you walk around and you find some food, or you find a pig that you didn't raise, and you hunt it down, and now you have a nice dinner. Some fruit here and there that you did not cultivate. You have a nice lunch. That's the way it's always been for us, and that's the way it's been for the last 250 years. We get better than we deserve. If we get better than we deserve, then we should treat each other better than they deserve. So I think some key words for this transition in the next era about our attitude would be acceptance of things as they are, of our circumstances as they are, not as we wish they were. Open hands to receive, and open hands to be grateful. Thankfulness, mercy towards ourselves and mercy towards others, and forgiveness. There is a way forward, okay, after this era of multiplications is ended. And in the third section of this channel, I'll talk about what that way forward is. But let me just say here, it is possible for people and groups and nations to live a better life than most people have today, even while consuming less than we do today. So we can have a better life while consuming a little less than we are now. There is a way forward. There is a way to flourish. There's a way to thrive. There's a way for your family line to reproduce. And that's the main point of this channel. So here we're ending the first third of that channel, and then in the next third we'll be talking about where we are now in the transition, and in the final third we're talking about the coming era and how to prep, how to thrive, how to reproduce in the coming era. So with that I'll finish. I wish you a good week. If you know anybody who's interested in this content, then invite them to join. In the meantime, keep coming back.